Become aware of the way you are moving and the way you're not moving. Sitting is bad. Slouching is bad. These are not bad. Our human body can be in that position, then they're not bad positions. The issue comes with how long we spend in that position. When we were early man, which was most of the time our human body has existed, we were getting up and down, moving, shifting. We didn't slouch on a chair. You can decide, because it's all about choice, to push past that if you want this for your body. Half of what I've found myself coaching is confidence.
Hi, I'm Caroline Carey and welcome to the Eat Nourish Love podcast. For over 20 years, I've created events, raised over 4 million for good causes, and been lucky enough to meet some incredible people along the way. This podcast is about exploring stories and insights that really shape us, with inspiring guests from wellness, business, self-care and personal growth. It's about learning to trust our intuition and discovering what truly matters, and how, with hard work, belief and tenacity, we can make so many things happen. I am so excited this morning to have time with Wendy here on this Eat Nourish Love podcast. I actually think this probably might be one of the most important podcasts I actually ever do, because I think her subject and what she's achieved is absolutely extraordinary. And I have got lots of questions myself to ask her about a few things. But Wendy is a natural movement coach. So welcome, Wendy, to our podcast this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So rather than me get all your story wrong and not get it right for everybody, as we were discussing earlier. So tell me, how did this all come about?
Unexpectedly. I was normal mum of 3. I was in marketing part-time because I was raising 3 boys. And I suddenly got injured. I've always been an exercise lover, so I've always been a mover. And I then went into a sudden, after enjoying running for a long time, a sudden, what would feel like an injury, but I never have ever known since what actually happened, where I suddenly woke up one night and couldn't walk and was in a huge amount of pain. And then basically didn't get a lot of help for it to really concertina the story. And that was then turned into a process of 4 years of chronic pain.
Wendy, that's terrible. 4 years.
Yeah, it was a lot longer. I remember saying to one of the key people who did help me, so how long is this going to take anyway to recover? About 3 months? And he said nothing. He just smiled, knowing that it's a piece of string. Everyone's body is different. Everyone heals at different rates. And that obviously he could already see that it was a complex issue because I didn't have anything that was structurally wrong. I hadn't fallen and broken something. I wasn't recovering from something. I just went out for a lovely run one day and then woke up in the night in sheer agony. So it was all very unexplained. And that also has its problems because then you kind of think, is this all in my head? And then also getting little help. Sadly, love the NHS for accident care, keeping us alive when we need it the most.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
Sadly, the long-term conditions, it's just not got the resources to really look into what's going on. So it took me 3 years to get a scan. And then after that scan, I was told there was nothing structurally wrong with me and I should be fine to go for a run when I was in still huge amounts of pain. So, yeah.
It's really, but it's extraordinary because we had a situation and I think people have heard it before on the podcast and it's on my story, etc., that actually we had a condition with my daughter. And actually it's when the NHS came in at its best. We were a case study of the Southwest, etc. So, and I think one of the things that my father was a doctor. One of the things I've always said is actually, it's not about being preachy, it's about actually when something an organisation as big as that can't help, where do you go? So go on. So where did that take you?
So that took me to starting to delve for myself. I felt exhausted, frustrated. When you have chronic pain, you're always thinking about your pain, whether that's consciously or subconsciously. It kind of checks in with you all the time to say, oh, where are we at this moment? In this way, before you do every movement, you have fear kicks in, and you worry that you're going to create some kind of flare up. So your confidence decreases, and you get pretty depressed, really, because you've got no energy, and you're comparing yourself, or at least I did, but I know most people do, to the person you were before, because you can't believe this is where you're at, given that you were doing all sorts of great things. I ran a half marathon a few months before. And then you suddenly feel, I used to say I felt like I was 80, and I felt that at the time. And I now no longer want to be saying that, because I think that's kind of anti-aging. And the important thing is that we all believe we can move well when we put the right inputs in. So anyway, I went off and got a lot of help from people. I had to spend my own money to do that. And I went from person to person until I found someone who was a neuromuscular therapist who deals with injuries or imbalances in the body that are clearly, because it's well after 6 months after what had happened, whatever happened, in part of your nervous system has kind of gone a bit wrong and is holding on to and poor movement patterns, but also your brain is telling you that you're still in pain.
So that's memory, isn't it? So your body's got a memory pattern going on there.
Exactly. So people talk about muscle memory, and they can sort of understand that, and it makes sense. And it's kind of a collective muscle memory that from whatever happened to my body at that point, what feels like, looking back, no trauma at all. And yet for me, I think it was a pattern of almost like repetitive strain, because I had continually been ignoring signals from my body and not having those treatments. I had never delved down to the root cause of why I always got a bit of a sore hip after I ran, and why my back felt a bit strange, and so on. So I had lots of niggles, and I had physio, but they would kind of pull a leg and give me 2 exercises and off you go. It wasn't a comprehensive look at what's happening that's destabilizing me, so that then when I go and put the impact in through running, something bad is happening. So for me, it was a long road in, and now when I look back, it makes perfect sense. But it really didn't at the time. So it was a lot of looking around. I found this neuromuscular therapist. I also worked with someone who performed myofascial release, because I obviously had a lot of tightness in my fascia. And I had to relearn developmental movement patterns. So basically those patterns that you use to develop from the baby that sort of rocks forward and back to get to crawling, then pulls up to standing, and eventually walks. And if you think about how many of those sorts of patterns that we go back to as an adult, it's not very many. So although it takes us a long time to learn how to walk, we then kind of take it as given, and boom, we're off. But actually revisiting those can really help to realign and rebalance the body.
So let's just go back a step. You talk about fascia. So anyone listening to this, what is fascia? What's fascia?
So fascia is the connective tissue that is throughout our entire body. And in fact, an interesting fact about fascia is that I can't remember how long ago, but I think it's sort of about 100 years ago, when they were dissecting a cadaver, they would find this sort of sheen, a bit like cling film, that they would, when they were cutting them up, they would then pull that off and kind of put it in the bin and say, oh, we don't need that because that's not muscle, bone, other tissues. And in fact, it was one of the most important things, because it connects our entire system. When that gets tight and knotty, that can really restrict the movement of our joints, the movement of our muscles. And so it is a really important thing. It also helps to stabilize movement patterns. So we want it to be strong and malleable. And that's all affected by the way you move. So the treatment I was having was to kind of unknot me, and it wasn't comfortable. It was really uncomfortable.
It's painful, because fascia, when it's tight, is quite painful, isn't it?
It's really quite painful, but there's lots of ways that you can address that tightness. And just passive stretching alone really kind of gets in the way that we need it to.
What else does? So you talk passive stretching, and I'm sure you'll cover some of these things in a minute. What else can you do to alleviate the tightness of the fascia?
So you can obviously get someone to do that. I had that through someone called a myofascial therapist.
Yeah.
You can also, there's something that I'm looking into at the minute that I'm fascinated by, which is called block therapy, where you can use a certain, looks a bit like a yoga block with rounded edges. I'm afraid I forget the name of the lady who invented it, but that's where you kind of lie on the block in different ways to both prevent and relieve the tension in the fascia. Things like Pilates, obviously, is great because you are stretching out in certain ways and it's more active than passive. And that's what we want, to mobilize the tissues in our bodies. When we do things passively, we don't tend to create, it relieves the tension. So you do a lot of stretch and you think, oh, that feels better. But you have to do it every day. And you may want to because you've got that tightness. But to actually get rid of the problem, you need to mobilize your body. You have to improve your mobility. And that's about having tissues that are joints that move through their whole range of motion, and tissues, muscles that are strong and long through their range, rather than sort of being really good at moving in a narrow range of movement. You want to have as much control through the range as you can. And that's joints, muscles, bones, fascia.
And yeah, exactly. And you talk about that because actually people always think bones are sometimes the things that are the strongest, but the tendons, aren't they? They can take, if you have a tendon injury, they can take years, can't they, to repair?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what I found out through the process as well is that I have hypermobility in several joints, and that is a laxity of your ligaments. And your ligaments are kind of they work as a bit of a braking system for your joints so that you don't go beyond the range of movement that you want to have, so that you're stable within that. And hypermobility means that you're always going to be a bit lax. So you're never quite sure where your body is in space. You can, if your knees go backwards more than you feel they should, you're hyperextending, or your elbows and so on, then you probably have some hypermobility in your body. You'll know how much. And that was a big contributing factor to what happened to me, that I didn't have that stability and strength in my system before I then went out and ran.
Are you born with that, or is it something? Are you born hypomobile? Isn't it? Hypermobile.
Hypermobile.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Yeah, and it's a lifelong condition, if you want to call it that. For some, it's absolutely debilitating. There's something called EDS, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is where you have it to such extreme that you can be in a wheelchair. So it's again, like most things, it's on a wide spectrum. And it can be really helped by collagen, because it is a collagen deficiency in all your cells. And you may recognize yourself in it if you have low blood pressure, if every time or regularly when you stand up, you get quite dizzy. And obviously this sort of, I'm really flexible, I'm great at yoga, but I still get a lot of pain. There's lots of different things where you can realize that perhaps it's not as much of a benefit as you thought. But the main bit of advice is to be strong. So being strong within a carefully controlled range is the best thing that you can do for hypermobility, and just anyone, obviously.
So what are the main misconceptions that people have about their own mobility and strength, do you think?
Misconceptions, I think my main thrust of my messaging is that exercise is enough.
What do you mean by what do you mean by exercise is enough? What, just walking, squatting, emptying the dish, using exercise the way you use exercise? Sorry.
So I like to talk about what I share as movement, because not all movement is exercise. If a lot of people have exercise in their head as being going out and getting their heart rate up, there's a huge link in a lot of people's heads to sort of more cardiovascular movement. But also, it's not really even just about what exercise is, because a lot of people are quite put off by the whole gym exercise thing, the terminology around it. But it's also seeing it, because it's been the World Health Organization, our own country, the NHS have done a great job of messaging about how important it is to exercise, and it is. It really, really is. But only recently have the WHO in the last few years added in the importance of movement the rest of the time. And if I look back at my own situation, ultimately, I was exercising. I was certainly, I was doing the healthy amount of exercises, and I was causing problems for my own body. And that's not to say that exercising is bad. It's just that what I didn't ever think about was moving in the rest of life. So it's less a myth, but it's more trying to shift people's thinking that the way we move in life is not going to affect us, because our tissues are constantly adapting. Our tissues regenerate different parts at different in different times, but pretty much every 10 years. So when we think about the body we had that we grew up with, we've got a different body now. We have been affected by all those, as I call them, onion skin layers of life. So the traumas, the physical traumas, the mental traumas, the surgeries, the injuries, all of the things shape who we are now. And obviously genetics have a huge part to play as well. But if we think about that constant adaptation happening, when we sit for too long in one potentially very relaxed position, then we are adapting to that position. Our body always wants to get really good at what we do. And I see everyone's faces. Sorry when I say that. Everyone. I did.
As my sister says, not here.
Every time. Yeah. A subtle rise. But one of the a myth I will move into in relation to that is that sitting is bad. Or slouching is bad. These are not bad. Our human body can be in that position, then they're not bad positions. The issue comes with how long we spend in that position, because then the adaptation is happening. So if we encourage our body to adapt by being in that position for hours and hours, we'll get really good at that. But therefore, for example, with chair sitting, we will get tightness of the front of the hips. We'll probably get tightness in the back line. We may get some lower back pain because our pelvis is slightly tilted forward, and so on. And so what I encourage people to do is not to say, yeah, but I sit for my job. What am I meant to do? What I say is wriggle, shift, get up, move.
I'm going to show you something.
Walk to the toilet.
Show you something.
Go on. What's this? Aha! We love the ball.
Under my desk and move around with it.
Perfect.
And then sometimes, no, people who are listening to this can't see it, but sometimes I literally put it over, the dogs aren't here, roll it on my floor here and just roll over it. And I can't tell you, it's just the best thing, because you realise you get quite tight.
It's the best. Utterly. And that's your body crying out for just moving full stop, and moving in different patterns. Our bodies love to move, even just little bits. And that's why I want to sort of pull the whole way back from the exercise discussion to where I sit. And I do exercise, I'm not saying I don't, but to where I sit, which is trying to encourage people that fidgeting, wriggling, moving, as you know, you see me getting up and down to the ground, being on the ground. I try to offer so many alternatives of small levels of movement so that people are not adapting to that chair pose.
So it's quite interesting, because it is, people always talk about the sitting, that it's the next problem, it's the next disease, etc. But unfortunately, people are sitting. So it's a bit like saying, come off social media, come off all these things. It's like, what can we do to help that situation rather than just eliminate it? Because we can't just eliminate it.
We can't. And the human body has been around for millennia. When we were early man, which was most of the time our human body has existed, we were getting up and down, moving, shifting. We didn't slouch on a chair for long periods at any point. So therefore, to stay healthy and well in our movement and our general health, we need those micro levels of movement. Now we're in the modern world. How do we do that around the modern world? We have to think of ways, and that's exactly what I try to help people with. So, for example, if you've got to be on a chair, I always encourage people to sit on the front edge of their chair. Not if it's on rollers, by the way, because if you're on rollers, you might fly. But if you're not on rollers, if you're on a nice solid chair, sitting on the front edge means you're not leaning against the back. And in that process of the lean, you're likely to tuck your pelvis under, which can cause chronic tightness in the pelvic floor in some people, not in everyone. But what it does is it kind of just slows our system down. Physiologically, everything just goes to a... And what we want is to just have a bit more in there into the system. So sitting on the front edge means we tend to bring the pelvis more upright. We have to use our core to hold up our upper body. And actually that's me surreptitiously training you to sit on the floor, because when you sit on the floor, you don't lean against anything. And sitting on the floor is a huge missing ingredient in life that a lot of people will sigh to hear. And yet it's so easy to get back into when we feed it into life in different ways.
Because one of the things I wanted to ask you was what are simple movements that we can start doing today. So we talk about sitting when you're working there. So, and what do you mean by sitting on the floor? What's that movement?
So ultimately, going back to that sort of early man, they were always down low when they were doing tasks, and therefore their hips were really flexed. Their knees were really flexed. Their back had to respond and move in different ways. Their spine was getting lots of lovely movement. You had to get down there. So you had to have the sort of braking strength in your muscles to lower your weight down against gravity. And then you had the strength to push back up. When you're on the ground, if you think about what am I going to do with my legs, they can't just sit in that 90-degree chair sitting pattern. They've got to go out to the sides, completely straight in front. You're getting your joints and your muscles to use different ranges. And that's what we're after. We're wanting that to then help us for life, because how else do we get into those different ranges of motion? And yet, unless we do set exercises all the time that none of us can remember and perhaps don't find that enjoyable. So getting down to the ground to do a task that you're going to do anyway. So, the challenge is, if you're going to scroll social media, think, I've got to be on the ground to do this. And think about the barriers that are coming up for you about, for example, you hear a lot about, the clothes I'm wearing, cold floor, dirty floor, and so on. And noticing that they're all your own barriers, that perhaps you can decide, because it's all about choice, you can decide to push past that if you want this for your body. And I'm not telling anyone they have to do it. It's absolutely got to be your choice and filling in ways to move in your life. So the beauty of being on the floor, sitting on the floor, is that your body regularly tells you to shift. You get a little bit uncomfortable in one position, you move around to another. And I coach people in over 10 different ways to sit on the floor. And more, in fact. But by doing that, you're constantly using your body. You're getting the movement regularity, even though you're sitting, and you're getting those different ranges of motion. And you've got to get back up again. So as soon as the doorbell rings, or you need a wee, or blah, 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 you realize that through the day, you're getting up and down, getting up and down. So you're getting in your get-up exercise without even realizing it.
So that is quite interesting, because I had a physio once who said, the problem is that we get fearful of falling. As you get older, you get fearful of falling. We're sure of falling down all the time. And as a skier, it's like, remembering how to fall. It's remembering just to, and I've had falls, in the last few years, not many. And because she taught me this, it's like you just let go into the fall. Because as soon as you tense, am I right? You can quote, but as soon as you tense and you put your arm out, and obviously our bones might be a bit weaker, whatever. But often it's the fall that breaks the bones because we get so tense. Is that right?
Absolutely. And one of the best ways, and that all comes from your confidence. That's all about your how familiar the falling movement is. Now, if you get up and down to the ground, you're falling every time. You're just doing it in a controlled way. And the ways that I am teaching people are effectively, which is what you're saying, to naturally concertina the body. Whereas if you're not used to using your hips as much, your knees as much, your ankles as much, then that concertina isn't quite as free. And that's the freedom of movement that we're trying to get. And actually, there's something in your brain that is familiar with the distance from standing to getting down to the ground because you've done it so often. So you effectively fear that distance. And I remember by the time that I was coming out of my pain, I remember looking back and thinking about how fearful I was of just literally my normal height. And I'm only 5'4", it's not very high, but I remember the fear was huge. And that fear can continue and grow. And so if you can combat that by making it, I talk about it as the most important meter you will travel in your life, because it will help you to be doing that regularly, not only to be more aware of your brain, be more aware of what happens when you fall, but also to know that you're safe. You're telling your brain it's safe to be getting down there.
So I just wanted to thank Maggie Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. I have always been really lucky with my hair. It's always been full and healthy. I've never really needed much help. But then I was lucky enough to try some of the products from Maggie Wellness. And I cannot tell you, my hair is so much fuller, shinier, and it's growing faster than ever. If you're dealing with thinning hair, breakage, or hair loss, their shampoo, conditioner, rejuvenating serum and supplements are designed to nourish the scalp and support healthy hair growth. What I really love too is that there are no harsh chemicals. Maggie Wellness products are 100% vegan, cruelty-free and free from SLS, silicons, parabens, GMOs and PEGs, and they're all in beautiful, sustainable packaging. So if you want stronger, healthy hair, why not try some of Maggie Wellness products, and you can get 20% off, excluding bundles, with the code EAT20. If you go to the bottom of this podcast, you can see the code EAT20, and there's the link. It's so funny because you super read my mind, but the question I was going to ask you is, if someone struggling with an injury, how the lack of mobility, how can they trust and feel safe and ease back into movement? Because it's the fear that is the other thing that makes everything so hard, isn't it?
And that is half of what I've found myself coaching is confidence. Most people who come to me who where something is gone a bit wrong, or they're noticing that their movement patterns are not as great, or they're seeing an elderly relative and thinking, I don't want that for me, and if I don't make some changes, that's going to be me. Most of them have perhaps got into more narrow movement patterns based on this modern world, sitting, not necessarily a lot, they could be active people, but rarely traveling that meter that I talk about and sort of moving there, and having narrower ranges of movement where they are working in a sort of a protective, as we hear a lot, comfort zone. And I help them to gradually push their comfort zone very, very gradually with things like balancing. Balancing is something we don't practice very much intentionally unless we are aware just how important that is to us. And to come back to your falling, that's a key part. That's a really key part. And we can integrate that into our day so easily.
So that's interesting, because I found balancing, and I've had lots of injuries, so I'll go past it, but I found balancing really hard on one side, because I think it's always one side, isn't it? We're always weak on one side.
Always.
And actually, it was because I realised it was because I didn't have my glute engaged in one side. So actually, it wasn't anything to do with the knee or the ankle. It was actually came from much higher than that. So if someone is struggling with something like that, obviously you can help. But what is the best thing for them to do?
To draw back slightly, a lot of movement, simple movement, is about the techniques that you employ to do that movement. So I recently did a post on social media that ended up going to millions, and it was about me putting on my shoe. And the point of the reel was me sort of backing up to put my bottom down on a seat. And the audio was saying, no, to tell me, no, you mustn't sit down to put your shoes on. Now, you may need to start there, of course. It all depends on your start point. But the point was, let's just keep trying to stay standing. Now, actually putting on your shoes and your lower half clothing is very tough without a specific technique pointer, which is, I can't go into detail here and obviously on the video, which is to add in, and go back to my reel, is to add in a hip hinge first. Because what we need to do when we're balancing over our foot is to have our centre of gravity over the foot. Now, if we take our hips back, but the top of our body is leaning forward to reach down to put the shoe on, then we have a centre of gravity that is over the foot. Whereas if we don't hinge back, then we're leaning forward, oh, we've gone. And therefore people think, oh, my balance is really bad, I can't do it. No, maybe it's just a technique pointer. Just like with upright balancing, spotting something on the wall when you are balancing, knowing where your weight should be. So stacking your body well, aligning your body well over the center of the heel or just in front of it. I say center of heel for ease because most people are a bit forward, so it's quite good to bring them a bit further back. And for example, your head. So the reason for looking at the point on the wall is to help your visual system, but and your vestibular system, your balance system, but it's also to stop you pulling your head down, because as soon as your head tilts down, you're pulling your whole body weight forward, and this is 5 kilos, that noggin. So you're already being pulled offline, and yet you think it's your balance technique. But if you've got all the little techniques working, being relaxed in the upper body. I'm balancing now, to be honest. I'm just showing you. You can't see my leg, but I am balancing now. But being relaxed in the upper body, but having tension from the core down. All these little layers that actually, if you apply them, then maybe your balance isn't as bad as you thought it was. And therefore, you're more able to practice it and so on. But who tells us this stuff, you know?
No, exactly. But also, it just reminds me of various people, but particularly Lizelle, who actually came to speak at our fair that you came to as well.
Yes.
And she's coming again this year in September. But she talks about balancing when you're brushing your teeth. So she always says, and that's habit stacking, isn't it?
And that is habit stacking. And I call it movement stacking. And so the 3 ways that I add extra movement into and different types of movement into my day are stacking, as you say. So that's putting one habit on top of another. So for example, you'll see a lot of me on social media doing my washing. Very exciting, sexy stuff. Where I am squatting, I do my deep squat at the washing machine because it's low down. I have to be there for a minute pulling, and I do a lot of washing with my boys. So I always know that if I'm there, that's where I'll get a deep squat in. So I don't need to think, how am I going to deep squat today? It's attached to that. So it's become a habit. Like you're saying, like Liz does, where you are brushing your teeth and you're standing on one leg. I do my calf stretch at that point. Or having props that also remind you in certain places, and you think, oh, I'm going to use that to do this. For example, being in a queue. So that's my second thing, is spotting opportunities to move. And that's where the modern world comes in, and we have to think, what's happened? What would we have done if this wasn't here in the oldie times? So the classic, the stairs are there to get us up the way, and yet when there's an escalator right next to them, everyone funnels in and queues to get on the escalator because it'll take you up. It'll take you up for? Oh, I can't use it. You know what I mean. You know what I mean.
I know what you mean, exactly.
But every time that we allow something else to move for us, we're losing that opportunity. So it's spotting those opportunities. And you know me, I'll be out on a walk and I'll see a tree trunk that's fallen down, and I'll see an opportunity for a quick balance. I will see, I'm probably going to do a reel about it this week, I will see a tree that's fallen over the track and there'll be a path around it that's well trodden, but I can see the space underneath. So I'll go underneath to get my hips working and use my body in a different way. I will choose to move differently in tiny ways. And then, go on. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, but it's exactly what you said. You choose.
You choose. It's always about choice. And we all have that choice. But we can also choose to ask our loved one to go and get the thing for us. We can choose when we really could just get up. And even if they're next to it, bring it back. And some people would say, well, that doesn't make sense. But if you want that little bit of movement in your life to keep you moving well for life, then that's the opportunity that you have to take. So it's always about sort of, I talk about being a bit of a detective, spotting the opportunities around you, and also starting to notice the things that are taking that movement away, like, I'm going to get a robotic vacuum cleaner that's going to do it all for me. Well, great. But what about your body? So always coming back to how can I add in more movement? And when I do my laundry on the floor and I'm folding clothes, I do it on the floor on a nice clean surface, because then I can get in an up and down. I lift and carry to the place, and then I move around the different piles for all the different boys in different ways. So my laundry, boring, mundane, every day, well, maybe not every day, but a lot of days worth of task is actually now a movement break. And so I come up and I feel great, but also I'm pleased with myself because I've used that time well. And that becomes a movement break. Sorry, just add one more thing. Sorry. And that's where you're stacking it onto something you do anyway. But the third way is an actual movement break where you actively choose to move. So in a way, you hanging over your ball and moving is your body saying, yeah, I need movement. But then adding on a bit more, being next to your desk and doing some calf raises, and taking your legs wide and doing some nice spins and stretching through your arms, doing some squats, just adding in a few purposeful, intentional movements spotted throughout the day, which you can do in an office. It's your choice. Again, it's if you're worried about how you look, then notice yourself in that and decide, am I that worried that I'm going to compromise my own body, or might I get other people joining me and we could have some fun? So there's those three different ways. There's stacking, there's opportunities, and then there's breaks. And that's the way I sprinkle movement into daily life. Sorry.
Oh no, I love it because it's I suppose it's infectious. It's like you inspire people and the engagement you're doing. But I was just thinking that this thing about sort of, and I'm not because the one thing I always think is very important is not to be negative about different ways and exercise, etc. But I often think by the time you've got into the car and you've gone to the gym and you've done that, actually a lot of those things you could have done just in your day-to-day things. Actually, and also there's a lot of mindfulness that goes into what you're talking about because you're conscious, so your mindfulness. So rather than sitting there saying I've got to practice my mindfulness today, you could be mindful in even me not interrupting you.
Oh, not at all. No, it is, because I think you're sort of celebrating the body that you're in. You're giving yourself time, but you're not doing it in a way that has this. I think the problem with seeing exercise, and I love walking. I'm obsessed with walking now that I am no longer a runner. But even I will find myself thinking, big chunk of time. How can I, maybe I won't get out. Am I going to fit it in? Whereas if I do 3 10-minute slots where I've got my walking stuff in eye view, or I don't even bother because actually it's not that cold, it's not raining today, just whack on some shoes and go and do a plod, put in a bit of music, have a little dance as I go, little tiny short podcast.
Yeah.
I come back a different person, and I can do that in 10 minutes reset. And quite frankly, that whole getting outdoors is you know, again, we know it's so important for us. So it's kind of about, let's not always focus on the exercise. Let's also think about how can we just move more. And then I always see that then has what I call a movement ripple effect, because you tend to end up moving more, enjoying moving more, feeling better in your body, and perhaps exercising more as well.
I love it. I love walking and do it every day. And do you know something? When they don't do it, you realise the difference it makes. And then when you do it, you come back with all these fresh ideas because you've given yourself some space. Tommy,
Yes.
if people are tight, you know, and therefore, I mean, how long does it take to? I suppose you've got lots of programs on your website, haven't you? So there's an awful lot of things that they do. But sometimes, you know, you can be very tight in your hips, can't you? And it takes a bit of time to do it. But it's every day, slowly, little bit by little bit, which is going to release it.
Yes, ultimately. So yes, I do. As you say, I've got a membership where I have classes, but 1 hour of movement a week in anything is not going to undo or make massive change to the rest. Yes, you'll feel better before and afterwards, and yes, it will definitely help you. But to compound that, you want to do little snippets here and there, which is why I have a whole raft of 5-minute videos, because those little 5 minutes, and then all the little tips I put on social media about just add this little thing onto here, teeny tiny. If you remember, or if you suddenly see me annoying you on social media, then you might just remember too. And then that becomes a habit, because you start to do it more regularly because you find it quite easy to do. And that's when you get the change, because you have the consistency and it compounds. But it's really important to not put a timeline on. It's really important to not look ahead too much, and in fact to be more present in what you're doing and with the body that you have, which is so that you are celebrating what you've got.
No, exactly that. And talking about your social media, Instagram and whatever, I think we were in a group together. Well, that's how we met originally, and your social media sort of blew up. So blew up, is that what you say anyway? But huge. But how did that all happen? How did that come about?
So it was through one viral reel where I was. There was an audio that came up, and it said every day, not all day every day, but every day. So I thought, okay, what do I do now that I didn't used to do before I was injured, that's made a difference, and that, you know, might resonate? So and I was kind of quickly doing this reel. I didn't have very much time, and I didn't have too much time to think about it. So I went outside in the sunshine in my dress and had a cup of tea in front of me, and I just went down into a deep squat and just sat there having my cup of tea. And I nodded and shook my head and nodded to the audio, and it absolutely went crazy, because people are fascinated by the deep squat, because it's something that we do tend to lose by the very fact that we don't get down to the ground so much. We don't sit on the ground so much to get into those ranges of motion. And people really want to be able to do it because they know it's very beneficial for you. Now, not everyone can do it, and people who've had hip surgeries and so on need to be very, very careful and take sort of professional advice based on their body. And it's not to say that they can't. It's just dependent on their specific body. But yeah, it went absolutely crazy.
That's hysterical. You know, cup of tea.
I know, exactly. And my boys all now will, you know, if someone says every day, then they will reel off the whole thing and sort of take the mick, cheeky. But what was even more encouraging for me, that validated that the rest of my messages were needed, was that another reel about 2 weeks later that was much more about the general way that I move in life also then blew up. And that was because deep squat is one move, and I talk about all our movements, all our day-to-day practical movements, because it's great to want to do one move, but actually the key is to improve everything just a bit, and that it's that variety that's going to really bring you the biggest wins. Because when we move in narrower ranges of motion and in repeated patterns, that's when we miss the ability to move better in general. And so actually being a specialist, so a great cyclist or a great runner and so on, is fine as long as you're also moving in other beneficial ways for your body to age well.
Where do you see Reclaim Movement and the work you're doing going in the future?
Well, I've always done this because I wanted to prevent people getting into the situation I was in by bringing awareness and knowledge about the importance of movement in daily life and the type of messages that I've been discussing. But I also want to empower people. I think there's so much pressure and I've suffered from that myself. There's so much comparison with others. There's so much comparison with when you were younger. We have these images of ourselves when we're older. And I try to just shut all that out and just say, who are you right now? What are you capable of? And where can you go from there? So I just want to reach as many people as I can with that message and keep sharing that. And then if people want to work with me, then they can come and do courses with me. They can come onto my membership. There's a whole variety of ways that they can do that with me, where they get a level of a sort of a touch point with me, and then obviously they can work more personally with me if they feel that that's needed as well in private coaching as well.
Yeah, I think it's really you've inspired me, and I'm certainly going to talk about something that I'm struggling with. In fact, I can't kneel. Yeah. So I've got it's all tight, etc., etc. It comes from being run over when I was a child at 11, and then 3 months in hospital on traction, drilled hole through the bone. With weights on the end, and then had to learn how to walk and never learnt how to walk. So if someone's got an injury, whether it's ankle injury and they're having to use, the insoles, etc., in their shoes, whatever, how do they deal with that?
I would always encourage people to find a podiatrist who has a focus on natural movement. Because, and just to give my podcast a plug, I had someone on my podcast, a podiatrist, who talked about just this. And it was a fascinating episode, and a lot of people got in touch because obviously the way that we move is very much affected by the platform we're on. So if we're always wearing shoes, and I include trainers in this, where the back is slightly higher than the front. If you think about that balancing thing I was talking about earlier, where the head's pulling us forward and our centre of gravity is forward, if the back of the heel is slightly forward, it means we're always slightly tipping forward. And to stay upright, we have to pull our body back to stay upright and not fall over. So we're constantly having issues with our balance, but also we're straining the back line of our body. And actually that can hugely affect the feet. So, I'm a barefoot shoe wearer. I wear minimal shoes, which have the same width sole at the back as the front. They also have a wider toe box, which is the bit that covers your toes, so that your feet can naturally splay. Because again, to balance, we need to splay. Whereas if they're squished together, and we've seen feet where the toes are all overlapping, it's really hard to balance, but it also affects the whole function of the foot. And our foot needs to move almost like a hand does. It's obviously slightly more restricted. We need to get a bend in the big toe to push off well when we walk, rather than pulling the world towards us. So our feet are hugely important foundations of our body. So I would certainly, there's lots of people have plantar fasciitis and so on. You can never jump from wearing normal shoes straight into wearing barefoot shoes. Your whole body would scream. Just like the adaptation I was talking about earlier, it takes you years to adapt one way. It also takes years to slowly adapt. Some people it's a lot quicker than others. If you walk around the house barefoot a lot, like I do, I'm always barefoot. I'll not show you my feet now, but they are barefoot. Then you'll be more able to adapt more quickly, and you would transition. So you would take out those types of shoes. And a really good way to sort of get into this is, wet shoes for the beach.
Yeah.
That have usually got a bit of a mesh top.
That's right.
And a thinner flat sole. They're a great way to start your body getting used to those types of shoes and just see how they respond. But obviously, if you've got more specific issue, maybe just, again, awareness, choice. not always specifically getting one bit of advice and going with that, but actually seeing what's out there. And with feet, there's a lot out there. Once you drill down, there's a lot of really, really useful advice. But it can be incredible that wearing a different type of shoe or being more barefoot can hugely affect your hip pain, your back pain, because you suddenly become more aligned. So, we should always look at a problem holistically rather than I've got a pain in the thing, let's treat the thing.
So just going back to children, and you've got 3 boys. Is that right? You've got 3 boys, haven't you? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, teenage boys.
Teenage boys. And are they round barefoot? Do they take their shoes off from?
Yes, we're always barefoot in the home.
Yeah,
and they can't imagine why anyone would wear shoes in a house, which is great. Not that they're hugely natural in lots of other ways, but actually they're starting to come around to my way of thinking a bit more.
That takes a bit of doing. I could talk to you for so long. It's been such a great conversation, but I think, as I said, I think this will be one of the most powerful conversations I have because of what you're doing and where we're going. And we're suddenly realizing there's an awful lot that we can do, which is, as you say, that's easier, fun, natural. It's natural movement. We can fit it in and do so much. Before we go, I'm a great believer in the power of 3. That's why I call Eat Nourish Love, inspire, engage, bring people together, etc. So I ask all our guests and for our listeners, what are 3 things that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Well, I suppose I could talk about 3 specific movements that I think you should go off and do, but I find that too narrow because I'm talking about general movement patterns, and quite frankly, you can get that off my social media whenever you want to do the thing. For me, it's much more about this awareness and how you see movement in your life. And it's that I think is really important to help people to move forward. So the first thing would be about honesty, being honest with yourself about where you're at right now, rather than where you were as a 20-year-old or where you think you're going, just literally where you're at and being kind about that. So to look at the positives, focus on what you can do, not what you can't all the time. We're ever so good at the negative, I can't do this and I can't do it yet. But what can I do? And let's celebrate those things. To progress, the second thing would be small and simple. And we hear it around us so much. But that is a way to create habits that will stick. And we all want habits that will stick. We all know that we've tried stuff for 2-3 months if we're lucky. A lot of gym attendance goes down in March. We try these things and they don't work. So if we start a lot smaller with just, I'm going to get down on the floor when I scroll social media for 5 minutes, and it might even stop me scrolling social media for too long, but I'm going to be actively sitting, or I'm going to sit on the front edge of my chair occasionally. Just these small things, and aim to do them consistently, which in my head is 80% of the time, because no one can do them 100% of the time. Life gets in the way, and quite frankly, 80-20 I think is a great way to live. I do that for a lot. That's why the chocolate comes in. And then the third thing is that awareness piece. Become aware of the way you are moving and the way you're not moving. And just notice those movements. Notice how it feels in your body. What feels good to you? What doesn't feel so good to you? Discomfort's not a bad thing, by the way. I mean pain. I don't mean discomfort. But becoming aware is the key to change. And the most important thing with that awareness is applauding yourself. When you make a choice to move, when you make a choice to sit on the front edge of your chair, when you make a choice to take the stairs instead of, or walk up the escalators, applaud yourself. Always applaud yourself. So well done. You've added that in. Tick. That's helped me in my movement bank for life, because you've chosen to move intentionally. And every small piece of progress, if something feels a bit better because you've been doing it, notice it, applaud yourself, because you're then creating this lovely positive upward cycle that says to your brain, oh, it's worth doing this. I feel better. I can move better. I can do more. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. And that's the direction we want to go in. But we've got to help ourselves to do that.
Oh, Wendy, I love it. And this last these last few tips are absolutely fantastic, and thank you so much for your time. As I say, I'm going to have long conversations with you after this, but where for the listeners can they find all your courses and what you do?
Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's always lovely to have, which is, I love podcasts. It's lovely to have a longer form way of discussing a topic, because you can really get under the skin of it, where with social media you can't. Yeah. So my Instagram, which is where I hang out most regularly, is reclaim.movement. Please come and see me there. There's lots of different movements and ideas on there. See what you think about it. And then my website is reclaimmovement.co.uk, where there's details of membership courses. You can sign up to my newsletter. And then finally, if I can just plug my podcast, which is called Make Movement Matter, that is in its second year now, and I have loved. And it's just all broad-ranging topics. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And I know everyone will get so much from this. Thank you so much, Wendy.